As the writers and actors strike continues in Hollywood, our favourite shows are placed on the back burner while the very real human cost of the industry is laid bare. From the growing disparity of capitalism to the inability to maintain a minimum wage as the cost of living skyrockets. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Armin Shimerman, a former Screen Actors Guild official and of course an actor of both live action and animation, as well as a writer. There's so much more I'd love to be chatting with him about, but for now, let's understand what's fair as the strike continues.
Celebrating 20 years of Trekzone, this is a Trekzone conversation.
Well, Armin, thanks for a little bit of your time to have a Trekzone conversation today. It's greatly appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, as I said in the intro, there's so much more I'd love to chat to you about, but it all pales in comparison to what the industry is fighting for right now. Just in case anyone's been living under a rock or they've come back to planet Earth, can you break down the past few months for us, please?
Well, in the past month or so, our negotiating team, I mean my unions, that's SAG-AFTRA, has been negotiating with the organization that represents the studios and the networks. That's called the AMPTP. That's the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. They could not come to an accord, and there are some major issues on the table that not only are the actors addressing, but also the writers are addressing. Although the unions have separate dilemmas that they'd like to resolve. In our case, in the actors' case, we are looking primarily for three things. We're looking for, one, salaries that are commensurate with the cost of living. If normally when one negotiates, when we have this contract negotiation every 3 years, and every 3 years, usually we bump up the salaries of the various contracts and the levels about 3%. So if I made 1 penny in 1920, one would expect that in 23 we would make 3 cents. It's bumped up. Well, that's 3%. Well, actually, sorry, my math is bad. We would just bump it up 3%. But because of inflation, that means that we will be, if we only bumped it up 3%, we would be making less than what we made in 2020. And so we would be, in real dollars, we would be making less. So we're asking for more. And it's not just salaries, we're also looking into residuals. Each different medium, whether it's broadcast television or cable or DVDs or in this case, streaming, each has a different residual plan. And unfortunately, as the marketplace is going more and more towards streaming, residuals from streaming are not commensurate with what we get for residuals in other areas. So we're looking to do that. There's also a question of, now I'm getting into the weeds, there's a question of time. For instance, on one of your favorite TV shows that has just finished airing, a streaming TV show, the actors did 3 seasons. Unfortunately, the actors were under contract for 5 years. That meant that for 2 years' time, they were waiting to find out if they were going to get another paycheck, and they weren't compensated for that time. Not only that, but usually in those situations, the actors cannot go off and do other programs because they're locked into that show. So there was 2 years when a great many of those actors on that particular show couldn't do anything else and just waiting for a green light to come back and do second and third season. In one case that I'm aware of, one of the actors waited, and then was told at the very end, guess what? We're not picking up your option, you're not coming back. So that person waited for, let's say, a year or more, waiting to be told that they were going to be picked up, and then at the last minute was told, no, sorry, we're not picking you up. So that's one of the areas. One is, as I said, is salaries and commensurate revenue. The other thing we're looking at is AI, which is artificial intelligence. It may not affect our industry right away, but we're trying to be proactive. We're all fearful that some of the sectors of our union will be greatly affected by this. For instance, there's a proposal by the AMPTP on the table that you could ask an extra to work one day, and usually that's a rather small salary, somewhere around $100. You could photograph that extra. We don't call them extras, actually. We call them background players. You could photograph that background player, and the studio, the production company, would own that image of that person forever. And they would get no extra salary besides the original $100 that they originally got. So what that would mean was a sector of our membership, which does background work, would literally be wiped out over a couple of years. You wouldn't need to hire any more background actors because you'd have them in your library and you could just recreate them with artificial intelligence. The same can be said about voiceover acting. For instance, I do a lot of work in interactive games and in cartoons. It doesn't take a genius to realize that within a number of years, the same thing that happened to the background actors could be done to the voiceover actors that participate in those areas. Once you got my voice in a computer, you can manipulate it to say any words that I needed to say for any future games or any future cartoons. Or for instance, the voiceovers that you hear between programs, that would be wiped out. And I suppose eventually, if the technology got good enough, you could recreate me in front of a camera, and you wouldn't know the difference between me or an AI image. So that's another area that we're fighting against, to set some guidelines. In the past, when I served as an official, I watched a lot of new media come into existence, and the unions were always very gracious and said to the AMPTP, we know this is a new medium, and we don't know where it's going, you don't know where it's going, so we're not going to ask very much from you at the beginning because we don't know where it's going to go. Invariably, all those mediums explode, and we're way behind the 8 ball the next time we go into negotiations, and they don't want to give us the same deal. They don't want to say, listen, you helped us out at the beginning, we're going to help you out now. No, they say a minimum has been set, and we're going to start at that minimum. So what we're trying to do is not make that mistake again, but try to set up some real guardrails about this new medium, which is streaming and AI. And then there are safety issues as well, and issues about our pension and health contributions.
You know, the last major strike of the actors was in 1980 with video cassette, Betamax, and all those new medias, as you say. It sort of seems to be this, every time something major comes along to generate another little bit of revenue for the studio, there's a major fight and a stop work to get them to realise that they can't just be hoarding all of the profit themselves.
Right, there is a disparity around the world between the haves and the have-nots. It's not just in our industry, and it's certainly reflected in our industry. We have people who make millions and millions and millions of dollars, and there are workers, there are regular Joes like myself and my friends who make a salary, but it's not commensurate with anything at the studios, nor do we want it to be. But at the same time, we need to pay the performers, the voiceover actors, the background players, the stunt players, the dancers, the singers, all the different cliques that are inside our union. We need to give them a living wage, or they will just disappear. If you can't make enough money to support your family, to support yourself, then you have to go out and find other work. So what will happen is the ranks of performers will be cut in half, then cut in a quarter, then cut in an eighth. And there won't be anybody left to make the product that people are eager to watch.
A lot of conversation on social media, whether from trolls or even the general public, with not a great understanding of what is going on, has focused on that top 1% of actors, as you mentioned, those who do make a healthy wage and whom are very well recognised. But as you say, they're not the only ones covered by these contracts. We have dancers, we have the performers, the stunt people, the background players, all these other people as well, the guest stars as well. Looking from an Australian perspective, all of us Aussie actors that come over and start out in those background roles. This is who the fight is for. It's to earn money to survive.
That's right. It's about making enough to survive, to have a living, to bring up children, to not be constantly worried about where your next buck is going to come from. Every performer has had to deal with that, but after you've gotten yourself established, and by established I mean simply that you have an agent or a manager, and you've done a couple of jobs, not major jobs, just a couple of jobs. You can see yourself continuing in this profession. But if you can't make a living, and I've seen it happen over and over and over again, if you can't make a living, then eventually you say to yourself, I have to find something else to do. And so you force people out of the business. Yes, the top 1% does make an enormous amount of money, but you'd be surprised how the salaries drop off almost immediately. After the first or second name on the call sheet, the salaries drop precipitously. And you mentioned guest stars. Guest stars, I believe that's called top of the show, which is the salary that guest star gets, is somewhere around $8,000 an episode. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is for a week's work. It is. But then you have to understand that guest star, unless he's a major recurring character on a show, is only probably going to get 3, maybe 4 guest stars during the course of a year. And that's including on one show or 4 different shows. So at the most, 4 guest stars is a pretty good record for a guest star. Now, if it's only 3, that's $24,000. And that's all you're going to get for the year. And if the residuals are not as good as they used to be, and they're not, then there's no supplemental income. And what makes it worse, in our union, in order to get insurance, which is a major factor for everybody in this country, we don't have universal insurance. The threshold to get union insurance is $26,000 or a little above that. So 3 guest star roles is not going to do that. So you've had a good year. You've had 3 or 4 episodes. Not everybody makes 8,000. They make less. And you can't get your insurance. And if you can't get your insurance, that's a god-awful expense that you have to face every year while you're bringing up a family.
This is the first time in 60 years that both the writers and actors have downed tools together. Are there any similarities between the negotiations back in the 1960s and now?
Well, the 1960 strike instituted 2 major things for writers and performers. The first was the thing I've been talking about, is residuals. There were no residuals before the 1960 strike. And the writers and the actors went out together, and they were able to force the studios and the networks to pay residuals. And why is a residual important? Not only is it extra revenue, but what a residual payment actually does is, if I appear on a show enough times, people will identify me with the role that I'm playing. And the culture in our businesses, if you're too recognizable as a particular character, it makes it enormously difficult for working Joes, not major stars, but for working Joes to get another role, because you walk into the room and they recognize you as the character that you're well known for. And they say, well, wonderful audition, but I'm afraid we can't hire you because you're too familiar. I will give you 2 examples. Leonard Nimoy, who you're all familiar with, probably had to become a director because he was too familiar for the character that he had created on Star Trek. And so he had to find another profession. because no one was going to hire that character to play something else. Now, yes, once in a while that did happen, but for the most part, it didn't. And I will tell you from my own experience, when I would go into an audition and they would say to me, "Oh, we love your work on such a show or such another show," I would immediately know I didn't get this job. I didn't get this job because they're only thinking me as the character that they're familiar with. So that's what residuals are for. So that was the thing that we got in the 1960s strike. We also got pension and health, which is enormously important. We got the AMPTP and the studios and the networks to make contributions to our health fund so that we could get insurance from our union. Union actors did not get insurance before the 1960 strike. I believe that's true of the writers as well. And pension, which for older actors like me is an enormously important contribution. And over the years of all the work that I have done and other actors have done, we accrue a pension which supplements our income in our senior years when the truth is we're not getting hired as much as we were when we were younger.
Is part of the issue here the heavy demand from streaming platforms that want shorter seasons? So they still want the same crew, but they're not working as long through the year, thus the rates are a lot lower.
Exactly. You've exactly right. You put your finger on it. When I was shooting the science fiction show that I'm known for, there was 26 episodes a year, so that's 26 weeks of work. Oh, more than 26 weeks of work. Streaming episodes are anywhere between 10 and 12, so you can see the difference in revenue. And at the same time, as I mentioned to you before, you're being held and cannot do anything else if you're a major player on that streaming episode. And the residuals are much, much less on streaming shows than they are on network television or even in syndication or cable. Yeah.
We've been seeing some of those residual checks posted online by striking actors, as little as 3 cents for streams of an episode. And that's not one stream, that's, I would assume it's a few months where it's all collated and that's the result out of that. So per stream, not even 1 cent being given to actors for their work.
Right. Again, remember the principle for why we get residuals. So you're getting 3 cents while your career possibly is going into the dumpster because you're becoming very familiar as the character that they're streaming. And that's the compensation you get for that. And to my mind, it's just not fair. They're using your performance and you're killing yourself. You're doing a good job, you become recognizable for that, and then, as is often the case, once that show or the next show is over, you're no longer needed and you have nothing to show for. But let us go back to AI, because I think, if I may, AI is a threat not only to the entertainment industry, but AI is a threat to working people all over, because once you can replicate people's voices, performances, actions, if computers take over the jobs of what most people can do, then a whole swath of working class people will be out of work. So we are slightly the canary in the coal mine saying, look out, watch out, this is approaching, we need to do something about it.
Absolutely. It really is this great unknown of where is this going to take us and how far. Well, I kind of know how far the studios, anyone really is going to push this. Anyone in a position of authority or management is going to push it as far as they can, because it's obviously going to be a lot cheaper than paying humans what they're worth.
Exactly. And what the AMPTP fears, this is their fear, is I once asked the lady who is the chair of the AMPTP, how many contracts did she negotiate over the course of 3 years? And I believe the number was 81. So that's 81 unions that she's dealing with during the course of the 3-year span. Now, what is traditional is that whatever bump the writers get has to be replicated with the actors, and whatever the actors and the writers get has to be replicated with the directors. And I don't know about the other 78 unions, but I imagine they too are looking at the 3 major entertainment unions and saying, we want a similar bump. So that's why they're fighting so hard, is if they make concessions to the writers and then to us, the actors, they have to make the same concessions for everybody. And they're fighting for their bottom line. The problem is they make so much money, they're just not willing to share it with the rest of us. It's that unfairness that a lot of us are rankled by.
And there's posts online about that as well, that it's not even 1% of the profit from these companies that's needing to be shared. Not quite sure whether that's, I would assume that that's just on these negotiations. So you could reasonably be saying another 5% of profit to these other 78 plus unions out there. Again, still, I think when you're talking 1% of $100 million, it's kind of not that much money when you really think about it. And I think that's really what it boils down to, that they're really arguing over pennies and cents.
Right, and they have their masters to report to, which are their stockholders and Wall Street. If they can show a profit, then their stocks go up, and the stock options that they all own will go up. So they want to keep the bottom line as low as possible so that they pass that information on to the stock market and say, look, we're a profitable company and look at our profit margins. So that's what they're doing, and we're fighting against it.
I do know, just on artificial intelligence, Bruce Willis is the first Hollywood actor to sell his likeness to an artificial company. I guess that's okay if you're selling the likeness to that, but there's really no option here with the current round of negotiations. We'll pay you 1 day's work for these background performers, and we will own you in perpetuity. As you say, where does it end from there? If that's agreed to, then we're moving into this territory of AI voice generation and a character generation as well.
Right. You may remember, you're probably too young to remember, but there were several commercials several years ago where they took, I think it was Jimmy Cagney and perhaps 1 or 2 other major stars, and they manipulated images into a commercial. Yes, they probably paid something for that, but the estates of those actors didn't get an equitable share for the likeness. We're talking about the use of the likeness of a performer, and that is very valuable to every performer. And so for them to lowball us on that, it is intolerable. And so that's why we're trying to set guidelines. Even now, for instance, if you take a clip of an actor from one show and put it into another show, you often see that in movies where they're playing something on the TV show and you recognize what that TV show is. They have to pay the TV show and the actors that are in that clip for the use of their likeness. So that's there already. But the extent to which this could be done, that's what we're concerned about.
And you also mentioned typecasting, for want of a better term, as well. The more work that you do, especially as a recurring guest star, or even a star of a show, you become typecast. You mentioned Leonard Nimoy. It's almost counterproductive, really, isn't it? That they don't want to hire you because of that. What's the point in working and having loyalty to a show, almost?
Well, you have loyalty because you like the people that you work for and you like the stories that you're telling. So there's loyalty there. And you expect for that loyalty to be compensated your fair share. It's when you're not compensated fairly that it begins to boil in your stomach. I myself have been in that situation, and it gnaws at you and gnaws at you, and you can't get over it. So I was compensated for oftentimes fairly. But what I'm trying to do here, and in my efforts affiliated with the strike, is to make sure that young actors who don't necessarily have the leverage I do in my senior years, that they are helped out. We older actors need to help out the next generation so that we don't leave them in the lurch.
Conventions have caused a little bit of a wrinkle as well, with the strike conditions prohibiting any kind of promotional work for the studios. Thankfully for fans, we've seen revisions to those clauses. Is that a case of it's never been considered, especially with the last major strike happening in 1980?
I think the parameters that we've gotten from the union about attending conventions is absolutely new. I've never heard of it before. But the primary policy is that we will not go to conventions and publicize product that the AMPTP companies own. So I've been very careful not to mention any shows that I've appeared on, because that's the policy. And that's the policy we must follow when we go to conventions. If someone asks me a question about something I did on any particular show, I have to be courteous and say, thank you for the question, but at this point my union is on strike, and I don't feel comfortable about answering that question. Because I don't want to promote anything, any product that the AMPTP has in its libraries, for instance. I have friends who said, well, why are we upset about shows that were done years ago? And the reason is because studios, networks have those shows in their libraries and use that product in order to stream them for things for people to watch. So whether it's the newest show on TV or something as old as Bonanza, they're all in the library, and it's still product that they can use to make revenue off it. And we're not helping them to make any more revenue, as they're not helping us to make any more revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are still making that revenue off the franchise that Trekzone was built on and has expanded from since. So, yeah, it's such a woven tapestry that is not well understood. I just want to touch on conventions again as well. You do have some appearances coming up, including the regular beat of Vegas. What advice would you give to fans who are going to be making the trek to be seeing their favourite actors?
Well, the first thing I would reassure people is the union has no problems about me signing anything that's put in front of me. So if you put my character picture from science fiction shows in front of me, I will sign it. You put anything in front of me, the union says, go ahead, sign it, no problem. There is a slight qualm about me selling any pictures that were once licensed by an AMPTP company, but there are ways to get around that as well. Legally and morally. So there's that. When an actor might be asked by an attending person at a convention about a certain episode or a certain scene or a moment, I'm afraid all of us will have to answer as I just did before. Be courteous and apologize for the fact, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that. Now, if you want to ask me how I prepare for work in general, happy to answer that. If you want to talk to me about the art form, if you want, you can talk to me about anything, as long as you're not asking me to talk about particular shows that I appear in.
And I guess that's probably a bit of a public service announcement on this podcast to sort of get fans thinking about other things to talk about, because you're not going to answer the questions. You're not going to cross the picket line just to answer a question, no matter how passionate someone might be. And I think that
people have to understand we are prescribed from doing that by our union affiliation. I should also point out we're only striking one contract, and that is the film and TV contract. That is our major contract in the Screen Actors Guild. But if you want to ask me about commercials if you want to ask me about interactive games, if you want to ask me about cartoons, if you want to ask me about one or two other things, I can't think of them right now, yes, I will talk to you about it. If you want to talk about Bioshock, absolutely, I'll happily talk to you about Bioshock. You want to talk about Ratchet and Clank, I'm happy to talk about that. Because that's not the contract that we're striking against. Just know we're not striking against everybody. We're only striking the AMPTP companies that are affiliated with the TV and film country.
And that is a good distinction to make, because there are quite a few independent players that have been allowed to continue work because they are doing the right thing by their actors.
That's right. Let me point out exactly what they're doing. So if they contact the union and say, I want to make this film, and I will agree to whatever the union and the AMPTP eventually agree upon. We will agree to all those things, no matter what they are. We will agree to do that. Then the union says, go ahead, shoot your film, shoot your TV show. We're not striking against you.
And Armin, we talk about SAG-AFTRA and we talk about the Writers Guild, and these people are striking and they're hurting as well and out of work. They're not earning an income at the moment, but it's not just about these two unions. It's about everyone else as well, isn't it? Yes,
it is. It's about the people who are on the sides that we need in order for shows and programs to happen. People like dry cleaners who have to clean the costumes. These are not studio jobs. These are done with local dry cleaners. We're hurting the gasoline stations where the actors and the directors and everybody else needs to get gas in order to go to the studio or to go on location. We're hurting the costumers. We're hurting the makeup artists. We're hurting all the people that work on the job. We're hurting the economy of the towns where we work. I believe Los Angeles is going to lose several $1 billion in income because of the strike that the actors and the writers are promulgating with the AMPTP. And I feel for those people. None of us in the union want to do this to these people because they don't have the ability to say yay or nay. They don't get a vote in this strike. They simply have to suffer and wait for us to come to an agreement. That's a horrible position to be in. And I want to say, I'm sorry about that. But if you hang in there with us, eventually we'll come to an agreement. And the type of things that we're addressing may, in some either larger or smaller means, will affect you as well in a different way. AI, if we can get some guardrails on AI, this might affect your work as well. So we're leading the way. We're dragging people behind us, but it's a good fight. It's a moral fight, and I hope people will support us in that.
And also just a quick point as well that you did allude to it at the start of our chat, that this industry, the actors and the writers aren't the only ones to be impacted by this, but you're the most publicised, I guess.
Everyone is affected by this strike, and it will hurt. It will hurt the cities where we live and work. But again, when we're thriving, when the business is firing on all cylinders, the economies of those cities pick up. So it's a give and take situation. Certainly Los Angeles has two major industries. One is aerospace and one is entertainment. So when the entertainment industry comes to a halt, it hurts the city, and it hurts everybody that lives in the city because the revenues all trickle down into other people's pockets.
And other industries as well across the world are going through this cost of living crisis as we come out of COVID. Can look to what happens here and just go, well, it is possible to have such disparaging views, but meet somewhere along that line, hopefully towards the middle, and things can get resolved soon, and everyone can move on, really.
Right. And it's not just our union. Our union will set the pattern for actors in Australia, New Zealand, in Europe, in Asia. We all belong belong to an umbrella organization, and what one entity does helps the other entities as well.
Fantastic, Armin. Well, we've fast run out of time for today. It is a majorly complex issue. It could go on for months. Hopefully, everyone can get back to work really, really soon. Thanks for beaming in today and having a Trekzone conversation. Hopefully, we can chat again about that awesome body of work of yours.
Thank you.